Hey noble ones, welcome back to my channel. This is the Metatron speaking, and today we are back into ancient Roman history again, and we are going to talk about a specific Roman politician who also served as an emperor, aka Septimius Severus. Septimius Severus was a Roman politician, but he was also an emperor from 193 to 211 AD. Now, oftentimes when you read about Septimius Severus, you'll notice two things. You'll notice one statement which says Septimius Severus was an African Roman emperor. This statement is correct, but it does need a little caveat, which I'll give you in a second. But the second statement that sometimes you will find is that he was the first black Roman emperor because he was African. Now, it's very important to contextualize this, and of course, as you know, the question, but was he black? Was he white? Was he both? Is a question that I think is excellent to ask in this channel, because you know I have no agenda, you know I only care about the truth and what the documented evidence tells us, but also because thanks to my team we can dive into said evidence and provide context. So let's begin by that. Context. Well, the first thing we need to say is that, of course, Africa, or the word Africa, is the name of a Roman province. But at the time, when you say Africa, you don't mean the entire continent, but you mean a specific section of northern Africa, consisting, roughly speaking, of today's Tunisia, Libya, and Algeria. Now, if you're familiar with Roman provinces and how they work, you'll know that they oftentimes change name, or sometimes the areas or the territorial divisions may change. Instead of just hearing Africa or province of Africa, you might have heard Africa proconsularis. That is absolutely a term that will evolve with time, involving different territories, but the reason why it's called Africa proconsularis, it's because it's being governed by a proconsul instead of a Roman legate. Now, where was he born? So we have established that he was born in the Roman province of Africa, which, as we say, is already different from saying he was born in Africa. The guy wasn't born in Central Africa, he wasn't born in Southern Africa, he wasn't from the Horn of Africa, if you will. But he was also born in what would be modern-day Libya. Now, depending on which section of Libya we're talking about and what period, it could overlap with the Roman province of Africa proconsularis, as we said, or with Africa Tripolitania. Regardless, he was born in modern-day Libya, Northern Africa. Now, having established that is fantastic, but it doesn't help us to identify his ethnicity, because differently from other areas of continental Africa, this specific section would be extremely multi-ethnic and multicultural, and you would have lots of different ethnicities mixed, which means that just saying that he was born in the Roman province of Africa doesn't tell us what ethnicity he would have belonged to, which means we need to dive into the actual sources. Bearing in mind the question, was he Roman in the sense that he was an Italian-looking Roman? Was he black? Or was he of a Levantine origin? Let's dive into the sources. While some classicists tend to promote a completely Italic origin for the Septimii family, there is a much larger number of historians who present a Punic origin of the father's side, supported by epigraphic and literary data. Specifically, an inscription from Leptis, the ancient Punic city of Lepqī, is presented, celebrating a number of Septimii. Septimius Severus, introduced as the grandfather of the emperor, our domini, nostri, who would have served as Sufete, and we find this in an inscription of Roman Tripolitania 412, and a Sufete would be a type of indigenous magistracy of Punic origins. Another important element in defining the native origins of the Septimii comes from the poet Statius, who wrote a lyric ode dedicated to a young man named Septimius Severus, who had been sent as a child by his family to Veii to study. Statius writes, "It is possible then that rugged Leptis in the distant Syrtes gave birth to you? Who will ever believe that dear Septimus did not take his first steps on each of Romulus' hills? Who will dare deny that once weaned he nourished himself by drinking from the fountain of Juturna? Your virtue should not surprise. Even before knowing the shadow-bottomed Africa, you immediately entered ports of the Ausonians, and adopted, still tiny, you sail on the waves of Etruria." And again we read, "Your eloquence is not venal, and your sword rests in its sheath, unless your friends beg you to wield it." But the most important passage is the following, passages 45 and 46. We read, "The language you speak is not Punic, nor is your figure Punic. Your mentality has nothing foreign. Italian you are." Maybe Italic could be a good translation, since Italy didn't exist as a country, but you know what I mean. Italia as a term absolutely existed in ancient Rome, and it meant the peninsula. At this time, it already actually included the islands too. Kind of depends on the era. But anyways, Italia was absolutely used, and the word Italiani existed. So after initially emphasizing the African origin, Statius insists several times on how no one would have ever doubted the young man's Romanness, who in language and customs is to be considered 100% Italic, highlighting something that would have otherwise been obvious in the case of a true colonial. In other words, the way this should be interpreted is not that they are telling us that he was 100% Roman in the sense of Italian Roman. No. This should be interpreted as this family is originally from the Punic world, but this kid was so Roman. He had no accent because of the way he was brought up. His culture, his understanding, the way he was so Roman that they would underline, look, he might be different in origins, but he's basically like one of us. If he was Italian Roman, this would make absolutely zero sense to say. And do keep in mind that when we say a colonial, we're talking about Italian Romans as a family that moved to another area, for example, Gallia, and then they have kids. And the children, they were born in Gallia, but then again, they're basically Romans, and they're basically Italian Romans, both parents being Italian Romans. That's a colonial family. As historian Anthony Burley points out, a member of a colonial family returned to Italy would have been deeply offended if it had been emphasized how Italian he appeared in language and customs, as these aspects should have been part of his original cultural heritage, and the poet's compliments would be useless if the Septimii had been of Italian origin. The poetry communicates a great deal between the lines. In the Roman mentality, the memory of the Punic Wars and the threat of Hannibal was still very much alive at this time. There is no doubt that the appearance in Italy of the first Libyan and Punic citizens must have aroused many comments and mistrust from the population, which the poet Statius wants to dispel. That's what it's doing within this appropriate historical context. The speech and mentality of his friend Septimius Severus are Italic because he grew up in Italy, regardless of his Punic origins. Now returning to inscription 412 from Leptis. It is remembered how the emperor's grandfather had first held the position of Sufete, remember, and then that of duumvir as a consequence of Vespasian's concessions. Now during Vespasian's reign, in fact, Leptis had been granted the ius Latii, that is, Latin rights, and a city that was previously a peregrine community, in other words, foreign, is recognized as a municipium. Its magistrates are automatically granted Roman citizenship, and their title changes from the indigenous one, in this case the Punic Sufete as explained, to the Latin one, duumviri. Around 120 AD, Lucius Septimius Severus, who is Emperor Septimius Severus' grandfather, marries an unknown girl, from whom he has two children. One of these children is Publius Septimus Geta, who is Septimius Severus' father. Geta married Fulvia Pia, the daughter of a wealthy family of Roman colonials, the Fulvii, so his mum was Italian. From this couple, Lucius Septimus Severus was born around 146 AD, who was to become the first African emperor of Rome. Now, what I think you all know by now is that I probably have a clinically diagnosable obsession with both wood and metal. I mean... Anyways, that's beyond the point. But if you too really like wood and metal, then what's not beyond the point is the dear sponsor that made this video possible, Holzkern. Holzkern means wood core in German and is an Austrian-based watch and jewelry brand founded in 2016 that makes really unique products for men and women. Holzkern has over 1,000 different products to choose from, such as watches, jewelry, handbags, bracelets, rings, and all of the products are made from natural materials, and therefore each product is unique. Moreover, they come well packaged in these, I want to say, a little medieval looking wooden boxes. In fact, I've got two here, check this out. I mean, I could start a new Metatron ASMR channel with this. So they were really nice and sent me two things. The first one is this ring that I wore just right next to my wedding band. On the website you can find it with the name Numerary Ring, and I think it looks absolutely stunning. But then again, look at this other one here, Numerary Ring still, but maple and gold. My gosh, that looks good. And yet what we have today as the piece de résistance is this watch. Check this out. So this watch on the website is called the Naturalist, and I immediately fell in love for it. Now, as you can see here, they have a lot of really good watches, but I mean, the watch is classy and stylish, and you'll definitely be very happy with the quality should you choose to purchase something today. And keep in mind that they offer a 2-year warranty on all of their products. Moreover, they offer a free express worldwide shipping from beautiful Vienna, and products typically arrive within 2 to 5 business days. I even went with my in-laws to the restaurant the other day, and the first thing they said was, "Oh wow, look at that watch you have got." Going down this list, I now saw this one, the Steric, and my gosh, that green. Okay, so what are you waiting for? Use my code Metatron to get a 10% off from their entire store, and you can click the link in the description or use the QR code. I'm actually thinking of using my own code to get that green watch we just saw. And of course, massive thanks to Holscan for sponsoring my video. Now that we have all of this information, we can approach the idea or the concept of Septimius Severus' phenotypic traits with a bit more confidence. We have established that Septimius Severus was therefore partly Punic, at least a quarter, perhaps half, but this is not enough to give us certainty about his phenotype. The Punic world was extremely varied from an ethnic point of view, and as the 2009 study of the onomastic present on the Kipi of the Tophet of Carthage by French archaeologist Stéphane Bourdin and Sandrine Crouzet, it was revealed that already in the 3rd century BC there were Punic citizens who were children or grandchildren of Greek, Etruscan, Italic, and even Celtic immigrants. So already, even though generally speaking when we talk about the Punic world we're talking about the Levantine people, as you can see, when you just say that someone has Punic blood, it could mean any of these possible immigrants in the area, with a lower percentage, but we cannot completely renounce them a priori. Furthermore, both osteological studies on Carthaginian burials and literary sources show that in the Punic social fabric there was also a component consistent of individuals of a phenotype that today we would absolutely define as black. Diodorus Siculus tells us about the inhabitants of the North African city of Veii, which was a subject to Carthage, and he tells us that their skin, and I quote, has the same color as that of the Ethiopians. And pair that with Frontinus, who tells us that some of the mercenaries or Carthaginian auxiliaries specifically during the Sicilian Wars were black. The data analysis that we can get from this is twofold. On one hand, we understand that yes, there were people who were black and lived in northern Africa at this time, and specifically in the area of Carthage. We know that in Carthage they had a whole enclave for black people. However, by the way this is worded, the city of Veii, their inhabitants were black, or during the Sicilian Wars the Carthaginian mercenaries were black, means that the rest of the population wasn't. Otherwise, what would be the point of pointing that out? They were of Levantine origin, so probably Semitic. Just the fact that he had Punic ancestry could mean that he was of Levantine origin, Etruscan origin, Greek origin, Celtic origin, or black origin. So what would be a good way to try and change the percentages of these possible ethnic groups? Apart from the actual population percentages, another thing that we could do is talk about which of these groups had more influence, since we're talking about a powerful family. Of course, the Levantine group would be the most probable in that case, but what we have examined so far is not sufficient to remove the possibility they may have been half black, and here is why. In support of this data, for example, there is a certain interpretation of the famous Severan Tondo, a painting that portrays the emperor alongside his consort Iulia Domna, and with his sons Geta and Caracalla in front of him. The face of one of the two sons, it is still debated whether Geta or Caracalla has been deliberately erased because of damnatio memoriae. But in any case, it appears evident that Septimius Severus' complexion appears much darker than that of his wife and the visible son. It should be said, however, that darker skin can be interpreted in different ways in this period, and if on the one hand it is known that tanning was a male prerogative in the Mediterranean world, to be contrasted with feminine and childlike paleness, and therefore did not necessarily imply an ethnic identification, in this specific case it could also be simply traced back to a Semitic ancestry, to be ascribed to the Phoenician element that was well present in the Punic world. So it would be a case of tanning, not a case of full-on dark complexion. In any case, there is something that can lead us to decisively exclude the image of a black or even half-black Septimius Severus, and that is a passage from the book Historia Augusta, in which the emperor, welcomed during a visit to Britain by an Ethiopian soldier who served as a irregular unit, so-called numerus, reacts in such a way as to unequivocally imply his ethnic affiliation. So let's read it. After inspecting the wall near the rampart in Britain, just as he, Severus, was wondering what omen would present itself, an Ethiopian from a military unit who was famous among buffoons and always a notable joker met him with a garland of cypress. And when Severus in a rage ordered that the man be removed from his sight, troubled as he was by the man's ominous color and the ominous nature of the garland, the Ethiopian, by way of jest, cried, "It is said, you have been all things, you have conquered all things, now, O conqueror, be a god." So Septimius Severus was troubled by the man's ominous color. In Latin, et coloris eius, tactus omnie et coronae, dixille ille dicitur ioci causa. So, what black man, or what half-black man, which usually tend to be black anyways, would be deeply troubled by the black skin of another black man? Just as a matter of deductive logic. This is from Historia Augusta, Septimius Severus 22-45. So the Historia Augusta is clear in emphasizing how Septimius Severus was coloris eius tactus homine, or troubled by the inauspicious omen of his scholar, referring to the Ethiopian. Now on this channel we already discussed on a dedicated video, here is the link, the concept of ancient Romans and race/racism, and of course the ancient Romans weren't racist in the modern sense. In fact, we could say that the ancient Romans weren't racists at all. They hated everyone equally. But at the end of the day, we do know that at least among some Romans, this doesn't necessarily represent the entirety of the population, of course, but among some Romans, there was a certain superstitious belief when it comes in association with black skin that had a negative connotation. But of course, this wouldn't be the case for example, black people who received Roman citizenship. They were Romans, but they absolutely didn't believe in this kind of superstition. And it's also probable that Romans that maybe lived in colonial provinces, or Romans that were, for example, traders or dealt with people of other ethnicities, would have been more open-minded when it comes to this, whereas for example, Italian Romans, or specifically powerful members of, for instance, the Senate, would have been, as we know, a lot more anyone who isn't an Italian Roman is below us. That was something that a lot of Romans believed. But as I say, even though we can't know up to what extent the idea of someone with black skin would be a bearer of misfortune, we don't know how widespread this thought was within the empire, it is however evident that this was part of Septimius Severus' beliefs, or at least that the compiler of the Historia Augusta decided to attribute this specific superstition to the emperor. Now, whether it be a reliable or fabricated chronicle, in any case it appears evident that Septimius Severus could not have been black or half himself, because in that case he certainly would not have attributed a negative character to his own somatic characteristics or phenotypic traits. Or, on the same note, no compiler having the emperor's physical appearance in mind would have attributed precisely this specific superstition to him. Consequently, if we can certainly indicate Septimius Severus as an African emperor, and this statement is indeed geographically correct since he was born in Africa, and to a certain extent we can indicate him as an emperor with Libo-Phoenician/Carthaginian origins, which was a peculiar element if we consider the hostility that opposed Carthage and Rome for so long, we cannot in any case define him as a black Roman emperor. So on his specific phenotype we hardly have any concrete and definitive evidence. We don't have certainties, particularly due to the marked multi-ethnicity of the Punic world. But in general, we can say that without doubt Septimius Severus was belonging to a reality that ranged from Near Eastern phenotypes, typical of Semitic lineages, to Mediterranean and European phenotype. So, now that we have read all of this evidence, we have established he wasn't black, and most likely he wasn't half black. But was he white? Well, this kind of makes it a little complicated without putting a lot of caveats when it comes to the modern way we use that term, because at the end of the day, there are different ways to use the term. We could use it in the way Benjamin Franklin used it, and according to him, which is still quite a popular way of using the word white, for example, in America, then unless you're like of Germanic or Anglo-Saxon origin, you're not white. So even an Irishman is not white, and I wouldn't be white, and someone from Scandinavia wouldn't be white. So if this is the way you're using this nomenclature, then no, he wasn't white. But if you use the way we usually refer to or utilize the term white here in Europe, well, now I'm in America, but in Europe, then normally when you say white, you mean a European, in the sense that someone who is from, whether it be England, Germany, France, Spain, Italy, Greece, we all tend to use usually the term white, unless you belong, I suppose, to some of those Mediterraneans who tend to have a darker skin. Not my case, as you can see. In that case, yes, he could have been half white, considering the other half Semitic. Once again though, if by white you just mean someone with fair skin, then I imagine some Semitic populations do have fair skin, and in that case he may have been just 100% white. That's not the way I usually use it, however, because it doesn't really help us, particularly when explaining this. So this is why, rather than ask him, yes, but was he white, I would say he would have been probably half European, half Semitic, and would have had some kind of tanned or possibly olive skin. All in all, of course it doesn't really matter what he looked like. What's really interesting is the reforms, his policies, and in general the history behind the man. But on the other hand, I don't think there is anything wrong with asking this question, particularly considering the fact that when you navigate the internet, or surf the internet should we say, you will find a lot of answers that unfortunately are not based on evidence, like the answers that we have seen today on this channel, but they're based on personal agendas that are of course politically motivated. And a lot of the times these will specifically apply selective bias and only push evidence that proves the point that they want to be true. Regardless, I hope that you found this video interesting, and of course let me know what you think in the comments below. Don't forget to take advantage of the amazing offer that our sponsor today has for you, and click the link in the description below and use my special code. Thank you very much for watching, and remember, the Metatron has spread his wings. Goodbye.